People always ask me, they'll say, well, why'd you change the names? I said, well, save Vitro and Amplifon and save Citizen. You still ask me that.
That's a great question. We get the name all the time, and no, we are not a base-based organization.
Vitae software that can help map the entire land area that we're looking at to basically look and see where the issues may be quicker, faster, and safer.
This is the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect podcast with your host, Ryan Ray.
Welcome to another edition of the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ray, as always. So good to have you with us today. If you're not familiar with the show, this is the show that connects you to folks in the upstream, midstream, downstream, anywhere in the oil and gas business. We bring them so you can meet them. And the show, as always, is brought to you by R Squared Global. R Squared Global will handle your engineering, survey, land, GIS needs. For more information, go to GoR2.com. If you haven't connected with me, I hope that you will on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile will be in the show notes. With all that being said, we have on a guest today from a company called LiquidFrameworks. Travis Parigi is the founder and CEO. Travis, it's great to have you on today. How are you doing, sir? And tell us a little bit about your company.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you having me on the show. I'm excited to talk to you today. Well, LiquidFrameworks, we're a software company here in Houston, Texas, and we are focused on the upstream oil and gas service provider market. We're really exclusively focused on the energy space. We work on the quote-to-cash process. As you see it in the energy space, it's pretty unique. There's some very domain-specific problems that have to be solved, and we've been doing it since I started the company back in 2005.
Okay, you said there's some very specific problems. What are some of those problems that you guys have identified and that you're trying to tackle?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So in the oil and gas space, we find that when we've got to go out, for instance, to the field, we're working on a wireline job or we're doing a cementing job. There are a lot of things that you have to do that the company man might require. So, for instance, the operator stamp, and that's something that you don't often find in other industries, and they like to put a physical stamp on the field ticket. Well, we've incorporated that type of domain-specific functionality into our mobile app and allowed the service provider's field engineer to capture that stamp without actually going and generating paper and regressing back to a more manual process. And there's some other things like stage-based pricing. You find that in a lot of frac jobs that get quoted out there. And so being able to do those kind of things positions us nicely within the oil and gas space to be able to hit those unique needs that we find out there at our customers.
You know, one of the things I'm always curious about when you think about technology in the oil and gas space, we've always kind of been ridiculed for kind of being behind. And there's some good reason for that. You said you've been around since 2005. Looking at your website here, you talk about being in the field, doing stuff remotely. Yeah, I see a picture, I think it's a tablet, looks like, or a smartphone on your website. How much trouble do you guys have with dealing with some of these remote locations? How do you kind of overcome some of that as an obstacle? Because if you're out there in the field and you got guys in the office, I've always wondered, you know, from a tech company standpoint, how do you evaluate, hey, you're going out here, if you need to link up, what are the best ways to do that? Or is that a problem that you guys don't really have an issue with anymore?
We see that problem every day. So we've been dealing with that problem for, I guess, about 14, 15 years now since starting the company. And you really, even today in 2019, a lot of times you don't find good connectivity at the well site. There are some cases where you do, but we have about 55% of our users are offline 90% of the time. And so we have to be able to address that with our mobile application. We've done that through allowing the application to run completely offline. And so we've solved it by really catering to the problem of offline and no connectivity by starting with an offline mentality first. There are some customers who have gone out and they get hotspots and air cards and all these kind of things that they'll achieve connectivity here and there, but you really can't rely on that connectivity. I mean, even in a major metropolitan area, a lot of times you could be in a basement or you could be somewhere where you may not have connectivity, even in a major metropolitan area. So we've solved it by basically allowing our application to run completely offline with no network connectivity. Okay,
so without getting too much into the nerd stuff, the weeds here, if you're listening to this, you know, someone might be listening and go, okay, that's pretty neat. It can run offline. How do you since you can't connect to the cloud, how do you guys kind of, again, without having to get too tech savvy, I'm not a tech guy, but how do you guys prevent, data loss or something like that, or ensure that the data does get to the cloud once there is connectivity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's not that we're running disconnected all the time. So we're not saying that you never can connect or the field engineer never has connectivity. It's that the majority of the time they don't. And so what we do is we cache up that data. So we hold on to those transactions that have been done while they're away from internet connectivity. And then when they do get to internet connectivity, maybe they get to their hotel or they get back to their field location or they get to their house or cell connectivity. Then at that point, we do what's called a bidirectional synchronization of the data takes place. And it's actually a merge of the data. So any data that has been created back up in the cloud since they last went online gets pulled down. And any data that field engineer has created since they were online last time gets pushed up. And so it does a bidirectional two-way synchronization. But it goes further than that. It actually even syncs up any configuration changes that have been made. So we find in the oil field, everybody tends to do their business a little bit differently. And so we've tried to really accommodate that. And so we sync not only data, but also configuration as well.
I see one of your services you have on your website, which is liquidframeworks.com. Again, we'll link to it in the show notes, is an analytics tool. First off, let's kind of break down what that analytics tool does, and then I'll kind of ask some questions about, because as you know, analytics and big data and all this stuff is kind of a buzzword right now in the industry. So first off, let's kind of start with what exactly does it do?
Sure. So the analytics engine really provides the ability to get business intelligence and reporting out of every bit of data that we collect, be it in the field or through the back office processes that get run with that field data. So you can do things like run utilization reports. You can do things on the asset management side of things, such as running mean time between failure or mean time to repair. A lot of great KPIs that you can generate from the analytics engine that give the executives and the people running the operations better information based upon real data that's collected out in the field in order to make the best decisions for the business. So it really is about generating great business intelligence and great reports off of any of the data that's collected, really. It's not just the data that's standard with our system, but any extensions that our customers build on top of the platform, all that is immediately reportable and available through the analytics engine.
One of the things on the Texas Oil and Gas podcast, Josh and I have discussed is you don't know what you don't know. And it kind of sounds, silly. It's kind of a cliche, but when you think about data and analytics, oil and gas for so long has not really been into the big data game. We've done analytics, obviously. It seems like we're moving there now. As someone who offers analytical value to your customers, and you've been in business since 2005, have you found that over the time of collecting data, querying the system, asking questions has enabled customers to discover things about themselves that they didn't even know that they needed to know? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, sure. I mean, we see that customers will oftentimes ask us, "Well, we don't have all that kind of data. We're missing that." And I'll tell them a lot of times that you'd be surprised at what you might have just in your existing systems today, even your ERP systems, that is valuable and can be leveraged. A great example is pricing. So we can go back in a lot of our customers' cases and see the data in Field FX, but you can go beyond Field FX and even look at the ERP systems and see a lot of great, rich pricing data related to business segments and customers and lines of business and markets, and take that pricing data and you can run that against what are called collaborative filtering algorithms. It's basically machine learning to figure out what's the next optimal price to use in these current market conditions with another customer or maybe the same customer in order to have the best opportunity to win the quote, for instance. And that's data that a lot of these customers already have. And so by just using what we have in Field FX and leveraging the data that we continue to collect from an operational perspective and marrying those two sets of data up, we can really infer some great information from that data to a lot of times help determine what's the best way to quote or bid a complex service job. I mean, we're really empowering the salespeople at these service provider organizations with tools that they historically have never had at their disposal. It's quite unique.
One more question about the data. I've kind of alluded to it a few times, and just kind of from your standpoint, since 2005 to 2019, collecting data using analytics, I'm sure companies were a little bit more resistant to some of these ideas, over a decade ago. Are you guys seeing now that when you approach new customers and new clients, that they are a lot more receptive to this idea of using data, using analytics, and using these e-tools?
Well, I definitely think internally they are as it relates to their own data. And I've gotten a little bit of concern from customers in the area of commingling their data with other customers, other service providers. And we certainly don't do that. We actually, there are technical walls that we have up between all of our customers. So I have seen some concern around that, and probably rightfully so. A lot of our customers look at their pricing as competitive differentiators. And so beyond the pricing data, I mean, there's a lot of other data that they have, obviously, that's a competitive differentiator. And so I have seen some concern as far as data sharing and commingling and aggregation across multiple customers, but that's not really the way that we solve the problem. We really leverage the data that's in-house within the walls of our customers to be able to provide that information. So I have seen some of that.
Okay, so what is the biggest thing, maybe outside of the data, just in general, with running a tech company since 2005 to 2019 that you've seen, and maybe as forecast a little bit in the future, what are some things that you kind of anticipate the industry to see over the next decade?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, I certainly think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now that we're taking advantage of, and I think that we have really just scratched the surface on it, is artificial intelligence, and specifically machine learning within artificial intelligence. I mean, it's just allowing us to do so many things that we have not historically been able to do, that our customers have not had at their disposal. And a lot of people ask me, they say, well, artificial intelligence, and we've heard this story before, we've seen this movie in the past, and it's different though this time around. And the reason that it's different is because companies now, software companies like LiquidFrameworks, we now have at our disposal a series of tools that we have not had in the past. I'm specifically talking about the computational horsepower that's available to us through cloud computing resources. And you couple that up with the big data that customers have at their disposal and the ability to crunch that data through machine learning algorithms, it really is a tremendous opportunity. And it goes way beyond things like pricing and being able to predict pricing and suggest pricing. We're doing a lot of things with it in our asset management module, where we're building in predictive failure engines that will allow us to preemptively issue work orders, be it corrective work orders, or it could be a pull from service work order for equipment that has a high probability of failure. So a good example of that would be frac iron, for instance, being used by a fracking company, maybe a pup joint that we're doing an inspection on, and we're calculating or we're measuring the inner and outer diameter, and we're doing some hydrostatic testing on it. And we run that against our big data set, and we have figured out that there's a, let's say, 95% failure rate, or there's a 95% probability that that joint's going to fail over the next 30 to 45 days. Well, in that case, it might make sense to issue a work order to either do some maintenance on it or just pull it out of service completely. So that's a big impact when you look at the safety implications that it can have, a huge, huge benefit to customers. And we're doing things even beyond that. I mean, if you look at what we're doing on the scheduling side of scheduling and dispatching resources, we can take a look at who's the right set of people to send to a job, not only from a technical competency perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So maybe we've got data that we can rely on and figure out that, well, in the past, these groups have worked together well, and we've historically sent them with this equipment. And so we can use that information, use these algorithms to get the optimal set of people and equipment out to the job site to do the complex service that's being requested by their customers. So I definitely think that the AI work that's being done today is making a huge difference. And we really, as I was saying earlier, we really haven't even scratched the surface. I mean, it's just got so much incredible potential with what we can do, especially when you look at the horsepower that's available to the end user on their devices. So you look at the new iPads and iPhones and Android devices that are out there, and they're very, very economically reasonable. They're priced very nicely. There's just so much horsepower that you can leverage on those devices. So our developers will absolutely take advantage of that and deliver just incredible functionality.
Okay, good stuff there. One question I've tried to ask everyone is, without obviously getting trade secrets or stuff like that, but just from a standpoint of dealing with clients. In business, as you know, there's things that if you don't take care of on the front end, they might seem small, but later on they become big issues. What are some of the things in your business that you've seen that you've had to advise clients on, saying, hey, you know what, this might seem insignificant now, but later on it's become a big issue if we don't take care of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say the proliferation of paper forms that just slowly creep their way into a business, and not only paper, Excel forms and just office type document forms, be it Word or be it a PDF or really we see a lot of it in Excel, these giant Excel forms. And at first glance, it looks like, oh, that'll solve a problem and we can get it out there and it's quick and easy to do. And somebody in IT or even somebody on the business side can probably put it together. And next thing you know, this spreadsheet turns into this massive, almost monolithic application. And it's hard to update. There's no security on it. It's near impossible to report on because the data is not centralized, and it's pretty impossible to syndicate and update in a timely fashion. And so companies, they let those types of things slowly work their way into their business process. And next thing you know, you just really have a huge mess on your hands. And that's kind of a very small thing like you were asking for, but on a larger scale, and we see this a lot too, is as companies go through the M&A process and they acquire more and more companies, a lot of times they will put off the work of actually integrating that company's ERP system into the acquiring company's ERP. And they end up with a lot of different ERPs out there. And that becomes a real integration issue. And over time, that can scale to a pretty massive problem on its own. That's kind of on the other end of the spectrum of what you were asking, but I certainly see those two problems quite often.
Okay, good deal. Well, Travis, first off, let me apologize to you because we've had technical difficulties and I was late. So thank you for your patience today coming on the show. Is there anything else that we didn't discuss? I know I was looking on the website. Y'all have ebooks. You have a lot of resources. Is there anything else that we didn't discuss that you wanted to mention before we get out here today?
Well, I noticed on a lot of your podcasts, you typically tend to ask your guests how they came up with their name. So if you wanted to hear that story, I'm happy to share.
Yes, I did. You're right. I did forget that. So please tell us.
Well, originally when I started the company, I incubated it in a consulting company that I have. And so I wanted the company to create a software product that was flexible enough to handle all the different business requirements that you see in the energy space, but also was rigid enough that you could really deploy enterprise class software onto it. And I thought, well, Liquid is very fluid and it's dynamic, and then a framework is very rigid and you can build your house on it. And so I put those two together and came up with LiquidFrameworks. And as soon as I found that the domain was available, that pretty much clinched it for me. So as you can imagine, finding domains, even back then in 2005, was pretty difficult. So once I got it registered, the rest was history.
Good deal. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. LiquidFrameworks.com, the domain, as you mentioned, is the domain to check out all of what they have going on. Is there anywhere else that folks could connect with you at?
Well, sure. My Twitter account's T Parigi. We have our annual user conference. It's called ConnectFX, and all of our users and companies come to it. It's a great way for people to collaborate. It's always the who's who in the upstream oil and gas service provider space, and we oftentimes have some operators that show up as well. So that happens in April. So it just happened a couple months ago, but I'll be looking forward to next year's here in Houston as well.
Well, Travis, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it, and best of luck to you guys in the future.
Thanks a bunch, Ryan.